It's just some data from world history. Roman law, the earliest allowed age of marriage legally was 12. So actually, you see this also in rabbinic Jewish law because that was taken from Roman law. So 12 is the kind of general age at which you can legally get married. Imperial Roman history, so roughly like the first and second centuries of the Common Era, you have data from like gravestones and stuff suggests that, or funerary inscriptions, says about 8% of women married at 10 or 11. So you had a lot, almost 10% of women marrying around 10 or 11 years old in the Roman, especially in Italy. A good example of this is St. Augustine, who died at 430, the famous church father. He's from North Africa, from Hippo, and what's today Algeria. When he was 32, he got engaged to a 10-year-old woman, a girl, and they were supposed to get married 2 years later when she turned 12, but it didn't work out. I'm not sure exactly why. So that's just an example. He's just a regular guy who's happened to have one of these to be engaged to someone at this age. Italy in the 1300s and 1400s, average age for women for marriage was about 16 or 17. So you can see that there's an increase in medieval Italy. This is very interesting. Ralph Fitch, who's like one of the first Englishmen to actually go to India that we know of. He goes on like one of these very early trade embassies to the Mughals, and he goes there from 1588 to 1591. And one of the things he writes about actually is how young marriage ages are there. He talks about one marriage he saw between a boy of 9 and a girl of 6. That people would get married extremely young, but they would only consummate the marriage later. But the consummation around like 10 was totally normal. And actually, one of the interesting things, he actually explains why. Very few places where we have information about this actually have an explanation. He explains why. People want grandchildren while they're alive. And we're going to look a little bit later at, inshallah, at life expectancy. And if you are probably going to die in your 30s, then you want your children to have kids and to get married and have kids very early. I mean, if you are going to die in your 30s, you want to get married and have kids very early. So the idea of, being in med school till you're 28 or whatever, and then getting married is ridiculous. There was no such thing as med school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Most people didn't go to any school at all. They were uneducated. They worked in agrarian jobs. And there was absolutely no reason for a human being who was pubescent and had sexual desires, for them not to be in a relationship where they could fulfill that. It was pointless not to have that, not to let people and to put people in those relationships as soon as possible. By the way, one of the interesting things about human beings as a species is we're one of the few species that actually is capable of sexual interest and sexual pleasure before we're actually able to have children. This is very unusual for animals. Like most animals, in fact, most mammals don't actually have sexual interest when they're not in, like, if they're female, if they're not in heat. Humans have sexual interest all the time, and they can have this before they even go through puberty. In fact, it's normal for them to have this. Jean Thénardier, a French traveler in the the mid 1600s in the Deccan Plateau in India, he talks about how it's very normal for marriage to be consummated between boys at the age of 10 and girls at the age of 8. Very normal. Ragusa, which today is known as Dubrovnik in Croatia. In 1458, there's a law that says no Ragusan men could marry women under the age of 14, but 2 years later, this is dropped to 12 for girls and 13 for boys. These are just data points I'm giving you. We don't have a lot of information about this in world history, but I'm just giving you pieces of, just shreds of information here and there. Pre-Ming China, so China, let's say in the 1200s and early 1300s, average minimum age was about 14 for girls, 16 for boys. So that would be, when people were getting married, 14 for girls, 16 for boys. In some U.S. states, like the state of Georgia, in the U.S. South, age of consent, so the age, not the age at which you could get married, which is actually could be any age, if the parents consented, but the age at which you could consent to have sex, even if you were not married, was as low as 10, well into the 20th century.